A single photograph destroyed $1 million restaurant empire in less than 48 hours. Picture this: a homeless man clutches loose change outside Millbrook's most expensive restaurant. The manager blocks his path like he's guarding Fort Knox. But when that weathered wallet hits the pavement, everything changes. One Employee of the Year photo transforms a simple discrimination case into the biggest scandal this town has ever seen. The viral video reaches 400,000 views before sunset. The restaurant's rating crashes overnight. By week's end, the truth about a hero chef's destroyed life explodes across national news. But here's what nobody saw coming: the man who caused it all would end up begging for forgiveness on live television. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, because this story of justice and redemption is about to get wild. You won't believe what happens when a family's darkest secret finally sees daylight. Giuseppe's sat on the corner of Main and Elm, its gleaming glass doors reflecting the afternoon sunlight. This was Millbrook's most expensive restaurant, where a single plate of pasta could cost what some people spent on groceries for a week. For most residents, Giuseppe's was a place to admire from the outside, dream about from a distance. But today, it would become the stage for a confrontation that would shake our community to its core. Theodore Washington stood before those polished doors like a man gathering his final reserves of dignity. 55 years old, wearing clean but faded jeans and a striped shirt that had seen better days. The most striking thing about him wasn't his weathered appearance, but his eyes. These weren't the pleading eyes of a beggar, but the steady gaze of a man trying to preserve what little self-respect he had left. In his weathered hands, he clutched an old brown leather wallet, treating it like it contained precious treasure rather than just a handful of crumpled bills and loose change. Theodore approached the restaurant entrance slowly, deliberately, as if each step required careful consideration. He paused at the door, took a deep breath, and reached for the handle with the careful dignity of a man who knew he didn't belong but refused to let that stop him from trying. That's when Delacroix Jr. appeared like a cold wind cutting through the warm afternoon air. The restaurant's floor manager stepped out, wearing an impeccable black Armani suit, his Oxford shoes gleaming like mirrors, every strand of his perfectly styled hair in place. But the coldest thing about Marcus wasn't his expensive clothes or his calculated smile. It was the ice in his blue eyes when they fell on Theodore. Marcus positioned himself directly in Theodore's path, creating a human barrier between the homeless man and the restaurant's entrance. "Giuseppe's doesn't serve people like you," Marcus said, his voice quiet but dripping with contempt. The words hung in the air like a slap across the face. Theodore held up his small collection of bills and coins, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "I have money, I just want to buy a sandwich. Nothing fancy, just something to eat." Marcus let out a dismissive laugh that made my skin crawl. "We don't sell sandwiches here, and even if we did, you wouldn't be appropriate for our dining atmosphere." I stood about 20 feet away, close enough to hear every word but far enough to feel like a helpless observer. The tension radiating from their confrontation was thick enough to cut with a knife. Inside the restaurant, several customers had begun to notice the scene unfolding outside their windows. Some looked uncomfortable, others merely curious, but none moved to help. That's when Sarah Chen stepped into the picture like an unexpected hero. The 32-year-old marketing director had just emerged from Giuseppe's carrying a takeout bag, probably from one of those business lunches she was famous for conducting at upscale venues. Sarah had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to navigating corporate politics, but the scene in front of her stopped her cold. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" Sarah asked, approaching the confrontation with calm authority. Marcus immediately shifted into business mode, flashing her one of those practiced smiles he reserved for valuable customers. "Nothing serious, Miss Chen, just a small misunderstanding. We'll have this resolved momentarily." His tone suggested this was a minor inconvenience that would be swept away like dust from an expensive carpet. But Sarah wasn't buying the corporate doublespeak. She looked at Theodore, then at the takeout bag in her hands, and made a decision that would change everything. "I ordered 2 portions and can't finish both," she said, extending the bag toward Theodore with genuine kindness. "Please take this. I hate to see food go to waste." Her gesture was simple, human, decent. It was also about to trigger a reaction that would expose the rot beneath Giuseppe's polished surface. Marcus moved faster than I thought possible, practically lunging forward to snatch the bag from Sarah's outstretched hand. "I'm sorry, miss. Chen, but restaurant policy strictly prohibits distributing food on our property. This is about maintaining our image and ensuring security standards are met." He clutched the takeout bag like it contained state secrets rather than leftover pasta. Sarah's eyes widened with genuine shock and growing anger. "Policy," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What kind of policy prevents me from giving my own food to someone who needs it? I'm not asking you to serve him, I'm giving away something I already paid for. The logical absurdity of the situation was becoming clear to everyone within earshot. Even some of the customers inside had pressed closer to the windows, sensing that something significant was happening. Theodore took a step backward, his face flushing red with shame and humiliation. The careful dignity he'd maintained began to crack under the weight of public embarrassment. In his haste to retreat, to escape this nightmare of rejection and contempt, he stumbled slightly. The sudden movement caused his precious leather wallet to slip from his weathered fingers, falling to the sidewalk with a soft thud that seemed to echo like thunder in the tense afternoon air. Coins scattered across the pavement. Dollar bills fluttered in the afternoon breeze. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the money. It was a small photograph that had emerged from the wallet's worn interior, floating through the air like a leaf detached from its tree. Sarah bent down instinctively to help gather the scattered contents, but when she picked up the photograph, her expression changed completely. Her eyes widened with shock and confusion as she stared at the image in her hands. It was a picture of a gleaming plaque with Giuseppe's distinctive logo prominently displayed at the top. The engraving was crystal clear, impossible to misread or misunderstand. Employee of the Year, 2019. Theodore Washington Outstanding Achievement in Culinary Excellence. Marcus saw the photograph at the same moment Sarah did, and the color drained from his face like water from a broken dam. He reached desperately for the image, trying to snatch it away before anyone else could see, but Sarah had already pulled out her phone. The click of her camera shutter sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence that had fallen over the scene. Theodore Washington Sarah said slowly, looking from the photograph to the man standing before her, "You worked here, didn't you? You were Employee of the Year." Theodore nodded slowly, his voice heavy with sadness and lost dreams. "Employee of the Year," he confirmed quietly. 5 years ago, when I still believed that doing the right thing mattered. When I thought excellence and integrity were valued in places like this." His words carried the weight of betrayal and broken promises of a good man, destroyed by forces beyond his control. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the drama unfolding on one of Millbrook's busiest corners. Cell phones appeared like magic, their cameras pointed toward the confrontation that was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. Marcus looked around frantically, realizing that his comfortable world of control and privilege was crumbling around him. "Don't listen to him," he said, his voice rising with panic. He was terminated for legitimate reasons. There were performance issues, policy violations, things that made his continued employment impossible. But even as Marcus spoke, his voice wavered with uncertainty, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as the growing crowd. But Theodore stood straighter now, the dignity returning to his bearing, like a master chef emerging from the ashes of his former life. "Do you remember me now, Marcus?" he asked, his voice carrying new strength. "Do you remember that night 5 years ago? The night I did what was right and you made me pay for it?" His words were deliberately vague, but they hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable a reminder of secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. Marcus began to tremble, his perfect composure finally cracking under the weight of long-suppressed memories. "You can't," he stammered. "You're not allowed to talk about that." Not allowed to. What Theodore interrupted, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Tell the truth. Remind you of who I really am and what really happened that night." He carefully picked up his photograph and placed it back in his wallet with the reverence of a man handling a sacred relic. "This picture is just a memory," Marcus Theodore continued, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "But the truth about that night, about what you did to me afterwards, about why a man who saved lives ended up sleeping in shelters, that truth is still out there waiting to be told." The crowd pressed closer, phones recording every word, every gesture, every moment of this unexpected confrontation. Marcus found himself surrounded by neighbors and strangers, all of them waiting to hear what would come next. Social media notifications were already pinging on dozens of phones as the first videos began uploading to Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Theodore looked around at the gathered crowd, then back at Marcus with something that might have been pity. "I think it's time people knew what really happened behind these pretty glass doors," he said quietly. "The truth has a way of coming out, Marcus. It always does eventually." For the first time in 5 years, Theodore Washington was no longer invisible, no longer silenced. He was standing in the light, holding the remnants of his former life, ready to reveal secrets that could destroy everything Marcus Delacroix Jr. had built on lies and deception. The viral storm was about to begin, and there would be no shelter from the truth that was coming. Marcus stood frozen as the first video hit social media with Sarah's simple but devastating caption, "Former Employee of the Year, treated like a criminal for trying to buy food with his own money." Within minutes, the views were climbing, the shares multiplying, and Giuseppe's carefully constructed reputation was about to face its greatest test. The photograph in Theodore's wallet was just the beginning. The real story, the one that would shake Millbrook to its foundation, was still waiting to be told. Sarah's 45-second video exploded across social media like wildfire in a drought-stricken forest. She had uploaded it at exactly 3:47 p.m. with a simple caption that would change everything. Former Employee of the Year treated like a criminal for trying to buy food with his own money. This broke my heart. Within the first hour, the video had accumulated 8,000 views, 300 shares, and 250 comments that ranged from outrage to heartbroken. By 6 o'clock that evening, the numbers had skyrocketed to 75,000 views. By 9 p.m., over 400,000 people had watched Theodore Washington's humiliation unfold in real time. The comments section had become a battleground of emotions and opinions. "Disgusting behavior from Giuseppe's management," wrote one viewer. "Employee of the Year doesn't lie, this man earned respect," added another. But there were also skeptical voices asking the hard questions. Why was he fired if he was so good? What's the real story behind his termination? The video's reach extended far beyond Millbrook's small community boundaries. Dr. Emily Watson, a physician who had attended corporate events at Giuseppe's, sent Sarah a direct message that made her blood run cold. "Miss Chen, I was present at a Giuseppe's corporate event in August 2019. I remember it clearly because not a single person suffered from food poisoning that night, which is unusual for large catered events. Theodore mentioned something about contaminated shrimp during the evening. Could we possibly speak about this?" Sarah stared at her phone screen, realizing that what had started as a simple act of documenting injustice was evolving into something much larger and more complex. This wasn't just about discrimination against a homeless man. This was potentially about corporate cover-ups, food safety violations, and the systematic destruction of a whistleblower's life and career. Meanwhile, Giuseppe's was experiencing its own version of digital apocalypse. The restaurant's Google reviews rating plummeted from a respectable 4.3 stars to a devastating 1.9 stars, as thousands of outraged viewers left scathing assessments. "They treat heroes like garbage," wrote one reviewer. "Never eating here again until they apologize," declared another. "What happened in 2019 and why are they hiding it?" demanded a third. The economic impact was immediate and brutal. Reservation cancellations flooded in throughout the evening. Corporate events scheduled for the following week were postponed indefinitely. The restaurant's phone rang constantly with angry calls from community members demanding explanations and accountability. Manager Linda Rodriguez found herself overwhelmed attempting damage control while watching the restaurant's reputation crumble in real time. Giuseppe's official response came in the form of a carefully crafted statement released late that evening. Giuseppe's values all individuals regardless of their background or current circumstances. The incident that occurred today was an unfortunate misunderstanding that does not reflect our core values or standard operating procedures. We are currently reviewing our policies to ensure that situations like this do not occur in the future. But the public wasn't buying the corporate speak and legal maneuvering. The comments on the restaurant's official statement were even more brutal than those on the original video. "Misunderstanding my foot," wrote one angry resident. "Where's Marcus Delacroix's personal apology?" Another commenter added, "You can't PR your way out of treating a hero like dirt." The crisis reached the highest levels of the Delacroix family empire that very evening. Raymond Delacroix Sr., the 65-year-old patriarch of Delacroix Holdings, sat in his mahogany-paneled office, reviewing the disaster that was unfolding across every social media platform and news outlet in the region. His restaurant empire, built over 15 years of careful reputation management and community relationships, was being destroyed by his son's actions in less than 15 hours. The conversation between father and son that night was unlike any they had ever experienced. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Raymond asked, his voice carrying the cold authority of a man who had built his fortune through careful calculation and strategic thinking. Marcus attempted to maintain his defensive posture. "Theodore has issues, Dad. I handled the situation appropriately according to our standards." Raymond pushed his tablet across the desk, the viral video playing on repeat. "Appropriately," he repeated with deadly calm. 15 years I spent building our reputation in this community. 15 years of charitable donations, community involvement, and customer service excellence. And you destroyed it all in 15 minutes because you couldn't treat a former employee with basic human dignity." Marcus felt his hands beginning to tremble as the full magnitude of the situation began to sink in. "But Dad, you don't understand the complete situation with Theodore. There are things about him that you don't know about." Raymond stood up from his chair, his imposing 6'2" frame casting a shadow across the office. "Oh, I know exactly who Theodore Washington is and what he means to our family. The question is whether you have any idea about the person whose life you just destroyed on camera." The conversation took a turn that left Marcus feeling like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. "Isabella will be returning from New York this weekend," Raymond continued with the measured tone of someone delivering a death sentence. "You're going to explain to your sister exactly why you treated the man who saved her life like he was some kind of criminal who didn't deserve basic human respect." Marcus felt the room begin to spin around him as pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know existed began falling into place. "Isabella," he whispered, "saved her life. Dad, what are you talking about? I don't understand what Isabella has to do with any of this." Raymond walked to his office window, looking out at the city lights that represented the business empire he had spent decades building. "Theodore Washington prevented a food safety disaster that could have killed dozens of people, including your sister," he said quietly. "And instead of thanking him, instead of recognizing his heroism, you destroyed his career and his life because your ego couldn't handle being corrected by someone who knew better than you did." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, trying to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew about the events of 5 years ago. All this time he had convinced himself that Theodore was the problem, that firing him had been justified, that the rumors and blacklisting had been necessary to protect the restaurant's reputation. But now faced with his father's words and the undeniable evidence of community outrage, Marcus began to realize that he might have been catastrophically wrong about everything. The video continued playing on the tablet screen, showing his moment of cruelty over and over again, each repetition driving home the magnitude of his mistake. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new consequences, and new opportunities for truth or further deception. But tonight, in the quiet of his father's office, Marcus Delacroix Jr. was finally beginning to understand that his actions had destroyed not just Theodore Washington's life, but potentially his own family's legacy as well. The viral storm was just beginning, and there would be no shelter from the truth that was about to be revealed. Isabella Delacroix arrived at Riverside Park at 7 in the morning, choosing the quiet setting for a conversation that would change everything. At 25, she bore none of the entitled arrogance people expected from a restaurant heiress. Dressed in simple jeans and sneakers, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, Isabella carried herself with the grounded confidence of someone who had faced mortality and emerged with deeper perspective. "Miss Chen, I need to tell you about the 15th of August, 2019, Isabella began without preamble. "Theodore Washington saved 47 people that night, including me." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had carried this secret for far too long. Sarah leaned forward, sensing that she was about to hear the missing piece of a puzzle that would explain everything about Theodore's fall from grace. The story Isabella told was both simple and devastating. Giuseppe's was hosting a soft opening for their expansion location with 200 VIP guests, including local politicians, business leaders, and family friends. The menu featured imported shrimp scampi from what was advertised as a premium European supplier. Isabella, then 20 years old and excited about the family business, had looked forward to the celebration for weeks. But there was something the guests didn't know. Isabella had suffered from severe shellfish allergies since childhood. Her father always made sure kitchen staff were informed, but with the new location and unfamiliar team communication had broken down. "Theodore approached me personally before dinner service," Isabella continued. "He said he had prepared a special alternative dish for me, completely free from any cross-contamination risk. I was confused because the main course was shrimp scampi for everyone. What Isabella learned later would haunt her for years. Theodore had discovered that the entire shrimp shipment was contaminated with Vibrio vulnificus, a bacteria that could be fatal for people with compromised immune systems. He had immediately reported the contamination to Marcus, requesting that they cancel the shrimp course entirely. But Marcus had refused, citing the money invested and the importance of the guests. Theodore wouldn't compromise on food safety, Isabella explained. When Marcus ordered him to serve the contaminated food anyway, Theodore made a decision that would cost him everything. He spent $3,200 of his own savings to replace the entire contaminated shipment with safe alternatives. He worked through the night preparing new dishes, ensuring that every guest would be protected from potential poisoning. Despite Theodore's precautions, Isabella still suffered from minimal cross-contamination exposure during the preparation process. She spent 2 days in the intensive care unit, her immune system fighting off the bacterial infection. The doctors told her that consuming a full portion of the original contaminated shrimp would have killed her within hours. Sarah stared at the hospital photos Isabella showed her on her phone. IV lines, monitoring equipment, a young woman fighting for her life because of corporate negligence. But here's what makes this even worse, Isabella continued. My father kept security footage from that night. Maybe it was guilt, maybe legal protection, but everything is recorded. Theodore discovering the contamination, warning Marcus, Marcus refusing to listen, Theodore taking personal action to save everyone. The footage would prove everything Isabella promised. It would show Theodore examining the shrimp shipment and shaking his head with concern. It would capture Marcus entering the storage area for their heated discussion. Most damning of all, the kitchen's microphone system had recorded their entire conversation, including Marcus's final admission that he knew the shrimp was questionable but felt they were too committed to change course. Marcus felt his authority was being challenged when Theodore refused to serve poisoned food, Isabella explained. Instead of recognizing Theodore's expertise and moral courage, Marcus saw it as insubordination. 2 weeks after the successful event, Theodore was fired for performance issues and policy violations. But that wasn't enough for Marcus. He created false documentation, spread rumors about theft, and systematically destroyed Theodore's reputation throughout the culinary industry. The confrontation at the family home that followed was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced with her brother. When she showed Marcus the hospital photographs and explained how Theodore had saved her life, she watched her brother's entire worldview collapse in real time. Marcus had spent 5 years convincing himself that Theodore was a troublemaker who deserved his fate. Now he was learning that Theodore was a hero who had prevented a mass poisoning incident. But Isabella wasn't finished. She had made a decision that would force the truth into the open regardless of the consequences for her family's business empire. The security footage would be released to the media within 24 hours. She would testify publicly about her near-death experience and Theodore's heroic actions. Marcus had 24 hours to decide whether he wanted to confess voluntarily or face complete exposure with no control over the narrative. The weight of 5 years of lies and cover-ups was finally beginning to crush Marcus under its enormous pressure. Everything he had told himself about that night, every justification he had created for destroying Theodore's life, crumbled under the undeniable evidence of his sister's testimony and the promised security footage. As Isabella prepared to leave the park, she delivered one final ultimatum that would determine the course of everything that followed. Marcus had spent 5 years running from the truth about that night. Now the truth was catching up with him, and there would be no more hiding behind corporate policies or false narratives. The next 24 hours would determine whether Marcus would find the courage to face what he had done, or whether the truth would be forced upon him by circumstances beyond his control. Either way, Theodore Washington's story was finally going to be told in all its devastating detail. The secrets that had destroyed one man's life were about to destroy the reputation that had been built on his sacrifice. Marcus sat alone in his apartment as midnight approached, surrounded by newspaper clippings about the scandal that had consumed his life in less than 24 hours. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on his coffee table next to his phone, which had been buzzing constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and crisis management consultants. For the first time in years, he was truly alone with his thoughts and the crushing weight of what he had done. The framed photograph from Giuseppe's opening night stared back at him from the bookshelf. In the image, a younger Marcus shook hands with Theodore Washington, both men smiling optimistically about their shared future. Marcus remembered that day clearly now how impressed he had been with Theodore's professionalism and culinary expertise. When had everything gone so terribly wrong? When had fear and pride transformed him into someone capable of destroying a good man's life? The answer came to him with painful clarity. It had started with fear. Fear of disappointing his father, fear of failing at his first major responsibility, fear of admitting when he had made a catastrophic mistake. When Theodore had challenged his decision about the contaminated shrimp, Marcus had felt like a child being corrected in front of adults. His wounded ego had demanded revenge, and Theodore had paid the price for Marcus's inability to accept criticism gracefully. His phone rang at 1:47 p.m. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but something compelled Marcus to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, and devastating in its quiet dignity. "Marcus, this is Theodore. We need to talk." The conversation that followed would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. Theodore's voice carried no anger, no desire for revenge, just a weary sadness that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "I called because tomorrow will be difficult for both of us," Theodore said. "I want you to know that despite everything you did to me, despite the years of homelessness and humiliation, I don't hate you, Marcus. I'm disappointed, hurt, angry about what happened to my life and career. But hatred serves no purpose now." Marcus found himself crying for the first time since childhood, the tears coming in harsh sobs that shook his entire body. Theodore, I'm so sorry, he managed between gasps. I was scared, prideful, stupid. I destroyed your life because I couldn't admit I was wrong. I turned you into a monster in my mind to justify what I did, but the real monster was me all along. Theodore's response revealed the depth of his character in ways that made Marcus feel even smaller. Admitting mistakes is how we grow as human beings, Marcus. Tomorrow you have a chance to do the right thing. Not for me, not for your family's reputation, but for yourself. Can you find the courage to tell the truth? After hanging up, Marcus spent the remainder of the night writing. Not a legal defense, not a public relations statement, but the complete truth about what had happened 5 years ago. He wrote about the family pressure he had felt about his fear of failure, about the moment when Theodore had challenged his authority, and how his pride had been wounded beyond reason. He wrote about the systematic campaign of lies and character assassination he had waged against an innocent man. At 6 in the morning, Marcus called his father with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. Dad, I need to speak first at the press conference today. I have something to say, and it needs to be in my own words, taking full responsibility for my actions. Raymond, surprised by the strength in his son's voice, tried to dissuade him. Marcus, you don't have to put yourself through that. We can handle this through proper legal channels. But Marcus had finally found something resembling courage. Yes, Dad, I do have to do this. Theodore gave me a chance to do the right thing, and I won't waste it. I've spent 5 years running from the truth, and it ends today. Giuseppe's main dining room had been transformed into something resembling a courthouse. Over 50 reporters filled the space. Representatives from 5 television stations had set up their equipment, and livestream feeds would carry the proceedings to hundreds of thousands of viewers across the region. Theodore arrived early wearing clean clothes provided by the homeless shelter, his dignity intact despite the circumstances that had brought him to this moment. Isabella took her seat beside Theodore in a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the assembled media. Sarah Chen positioned herself among her fellow journalists, knowing that she had become part of this story rather than simply reporting on it. The atmosphere in the room was electric, with anticipation, everyone sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. Marcus entered the restaurant alone. No legal team, no public relations advisors, no family members to support him. He carried only handwritten notes containing the truth he had been avoiding for 5 years. As he approached the podium, he looked directly at Theodore and received a small nod of acknowledgement. This moment belonged to both of them, victim and perpetrator, both seeking something different but equally important. The cameras began rolling, the room fell silent, and Marcus Delacroix Jr. prepared to destroy his own life in order to finally tell the truth about the night he had nearly killed his sister and 46 other people. Marcus approached the podium with trembling hands, the weight of 5 years of lies pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The room held its collective breath as he looked out at the sea of cameras and reporters, knowing that his next words would change everything. My name is Marcus Delacroix Jr. He began, his voice barely above a whisper, and I have a confession to make about the night I nearly killed my sister and 46 other people. The silence that followed was deafening. Camera flashes erupted like lightning as Marcus took a deep breath and continued. 5 years ago, I made a decision that prioritized money over human lives. Theodore Washington, our executive chef, discovered that our shrimp shipment was contaminated with deadly bacteria. He came to me, explained the danger, and requested that we cancel the shrimp course entirely. His voice grew stronger with each word, as if the truth itself was giving him power. Marcus paused, looking directly at Theodore before continuing. I refused his request. Not because I thought the food was safe, but because I was afraid. Afraid of losing money, afraid of disappointing important guests, afraid of looking incompetent in front of my family. When Theodore told me he wouldn't serve contaminated food under any circumstances, I felt like my authority was being challenged by someone I considered beneath me. The room erupted in whispers and gasps as the full magnitude of Marcus's admission began to sink in. He raised his hand for silence, knowing he had to finish what he had started. Theodore Washington spent his own money, $3,200 from his personal savings, to replace the entire contaminated shipment. He worked through the night preparing safe alternatives because he refused to compromise on food safety even when his job was threatened. Isabella stood up from her seat, her face streaked with tears as she prepared to add her testimony to her brother's confession. She approached the microphone with the steady determination of someone who had carried this secret for far too long. I spent 2 days in intensive care from minimal cross-contamination exposure, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. The doctors told me that eating a full portion of the original contaminated shrimp would have killed me within hours. She held up medical records that documented her near-death experience. These documents prove severe allergic reaction to Vibrio vulnificus bacteria, exactly what Theodore had warned us about. My brother made terrible mistakes 5 years ago, but today, he's showing real courage by telling the truth. This is the man I want him to be, someone who takes responsibility rather than hiding behind lies and false narratives. Theodore rose slowly from his seat, the dignity that had carried him through 5 years of homelessness and humiliation evident in every movement. When I discovered those contaminated shrimp, I didn't think about my career or my reputation, he said, his voice clear and strong. I thought about families who trusted Giuseppe's to serve them safe food. I thought about children who might become sick, elderly customers who might not survive food poisoning. He looked directly at Marcus with eyes that held no hatred, only profound sadness. Marcus, you were young, under tremendous pressure, afraid of disappointing your family. I understand those feelings. What I don't understand is the cruelty that followed. Not just firing me, but destroying my reputation, making it impossible for me to work anywhere in the industry I loved. You turned me into a criminal in people's minds to justify your own actions. The emotional weight of the moment overwhelmed Marcus completely. His voice broke as he tried to respond to Theodore's measured words. Theodore, I was terrified, he managed between sobs. Terrified of admitting I had made a decision that could have killed people. So I blamed you instead. I convinced myself you were the problem, not me. I told myself you deserved what happened, because facing the truth would have meant accepting that I was capable of such moral failure. Marcus turned to address the crowd, directly, no longer caring about his reputation or his family's business empire. Theodore Washington is everything I pretended to be during those years. He's a real leader, a genuine protector of public safety. I'm just a coward who destroyed a good man's life to hide my own weakness and moral cowardice. The room exploded with questions from reporters, but before Marcus could respond, the restaurant doors opened to admit District Attorney Elena Martinez, accompanied by 2 investigators. The legal consequences that everyone had been anticipating were finally arriving in real time. Mr. Delacroix, you'll need to come with us, Martinez announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. Based on your public confession and evidence provided by multiple witnesses, you're being charged with falsifying business records, obstruction of justice, and whistleblower retaliation. These are serious felonies that carry significant penalties. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Theodore one final time. The man whose life he had destroyed was watching him with something that looked almost like compassion. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus felt something resembling peace. The truth was finally out, the lies had been exposed, and justice was beginning to take its course. Theodore remained in the restaurant as the crowd dispersed, surrounded by reporters and community members who wanted to hear more of his story. After years of invisibility and silence, he was finally being listened to, finally being treated with the respect and dignity he had never lost, even in his darkest moments. The consequences were just beginning, but the truth had been told at last. 6 months after the press conference that changed everything, the legal system had rendered its verdict on Marcus Delacroix Jr. The courtroom was packed with community members who had followed the case from its viral beginnings to its final resolution. Marcus stood before Judge Patricia Williams wearing a simple gray suit, his once arrogant demeanor replaced by genuine humility that had been earned through months of facing the consequences of his actions. The charges were serious and the evidence overwhelming. Falsifying business records, obstruction of justice, and whistleblower retaliation carried significant penalties under state law. But Marcus's voluntary confession and continued cooperation with investigators had influenced the court's decision. Judge Williams sentenced him to 8 months in county jail, followed by 18 months of probation and 600 hours of community service, specifically at local food banks and homeless shelters. The civil settlement had been negotiated separately, with Theodore receiving $180,000 in compensation for lost wages, emotional distress, and the systematic destruction of his professional reputation. Giuseppe's parent company paid an additional substantial penalty to the state health department, along with agreeing to implement comprehensive food safety training across all their locations. Marcus served his sentence with the same quiet dignity that Theodore had shown during his years of homelessness. He used the time to study culinary arts properly, not just the technical aspects, but the ethical responsibilities that come with feeding people. Isabella visited regularly, their relationship slowly healing through shared commitment to accountability and making amends for past failures. During his incarceration, Marcus wrote letters to Theodore that went unanswered for months. He didn't write seeking forgiveness or trying to justify his past actions. Instead, he documented his growing understanding of the harm he had caused and his commitment to spending the rest of his life trying to make positive contributions to the community he had damaged. Theodore had used the settlement money and an outpouring of community donations to open Second Chance Kitchen, in a renovated warehouse on the outskirts of Millbrook. The facility served multiple purposes as a culinary training center, community kitchen, and job placement program for homeless individuals, former convicts, and anyone needing a fresh start in life. The 16-week intensive program covered much more than cooking techniques. Students learned food safety protocols, restaurant operations, job interview skills, and financial planning. The first graduating class included 18 students with diverse backgrounds, 2 homeless veterans learning to transition back into civilian life, a single mother escaping domestic violence, a former addict in recovery, and an elderly man who had lost his home to medical bankruptcy. Theodore's teaching philosophy went far beyond technical skills. Cooking teaches patience, precision, creativity, and care for others, he would tell each new class. When you learn to cook properly, you learn to take care of yourself and your community. The kitchen motto painted on the wall captured his vision perfectly. Everyone deserves a second chance. Ingredients, recipes, and people. Giuseppe's underwent its own transformation under Isabella's leadership. The restaurant became a genuine community partner, hosting monthly dinners where customers could purchase meals for homeless individuals. All staff completed Theodore's food safety workshop, and the restaurant's revenue increased significantly as the community supported a business committed to social responsibility rather than just profit margins. Dr. Emily Watson established a free health clinic adjacent to Second Chance Kitchen, providing medical care for program participants and other vulnerable community members. Sarah Chen launched Dignity Media, a communications firm specializing in social justice storytelling and helping other communities address similar issues. When Marcus was released from jail, he applied to volunteer at Second Chance Kitchen. Theodore considered the request for several weeks before accepting, believing that everyone deserved an opportunity to make genuine amends through service rather than just words. Marcus started in the most humble position available, washing dishes and cleaning equipment, the same work he had once considered beneath his dignity. The students were initially suspicious of the former manager who had destroyed their program director's life. It took months of consistent work, never complaining, showing genuine remorse, and treating everyone with respect before Marcus began earning their trust. Slowly, he progressed to supply coordinator, using his business connections to source ingredients at reduced costs for the program. One day, a student asked Marcus directly about his criminal record and the reasons for his presence in the kitchen. Marcus explained honestly about his mistakes, the consequences he had faced, and his ongoing effort to make amends. "I destroyed a good man's life because of pride and fear," he told the class. "Now I try every day to build something positive from that failure and to prove that people can change when they face the truth about themselves." Theodore watched this transformation with the same careful attention he gave to perfecting recipes. Redemption wasn't about forgetting past harm, but about learning from mistakes to serve others better. Marcus was earning his second chance, one dish, one honest conversation, one act of service at a time. The program's success was measured not in statistics, but in transformed lives, rebuilt dignity, and renewed hope for people society had overlooked. 2 years after the viral video that changed everything, Second Chance Kitchen was celebrating its largest graduation ceremony to date. The renovated warehouse buzzed with excitement as dozens of program graduates, their families, community supporters, and local dignitaries gathered to witness another milestone in Millbrook's transformation. Success stories filled the room as former homeless individuals now worked in restaurants across 3 counties. Ex-addicts operated their own food trucks, and domestic violence survivors had achieved financial independence through culinary careers. Theodore stood at the podium wearing chef's whites embroidered with his new title, Executive Director, Second Chance Kitchen. The recognition he received now came not from corporate awards or industry accolades, but from something far more meaningful. Every person in this room chose to rebuild their life through honest work and community support, he addressed the crowd. "You prove daily that circumstances don't define character, choices do." The evening's most powerful moment came when Maria Santos, a formerly homeless veteran, delivered the keynote address on behalf of all graduates. She reserved special recognition for someone whose presence still surprised many community members. "I want to thank Marcus Delacroix, who teaches us that redemption is possible through service, honesty, and humility. His journey from convicted felon to trusted mentor shows that people can change when they commit to facing their mistakes." Marcus approached the microphone reluctantly, still uncomfortable with public recognition after years of earning trust through quiet service. The applause was genuine, hard-earned, through 2 years of washing dishes, coordinating supplies, and mentoring new students without seeking credit or praise. "I don't deserve recognition tonight," he began, his voice steady but humble. "I'm here because I destroyed Theodore's life out of pride and selfishness." He paused, looking out at faces that had initially viewed him with suspicion, but now showed acceptance earned through consistent actions. Theodore could have refused my request to volunteer here. Instead, he gave me what I never gave him a chance to prove I could change. Not through words or apologies, but through daily actions that serve others, rather than myself. Marcus continued with the emotional honesty that had become his trademark during recovery. Every day in this kitchen, I remember the consequences of putting ego before people's safety. You're all rebuilding lives from difficult circumstances. I'm rebuilding character from moral failure. We're learning the same lesson that worth comes from how we treat others, especially when nobody is watching. Theodore then approached the podium for his closing remarks, carrying a small wooden box that had become central to the evening ceremony. This program teaches that everyone deserves a second chance, he said, opening the box to reveal his old leather wallet preserved behind glass. Not because we forget harm that was done, but because people can choose to become better than their worst moments. He lifted the wallet carefully, showing the worn Employee of the Year photograph that had started everything. This represented my old life cooking for profit recognition and status. The wallet also contained a new addition, a recent photograph of Second Chance Kitchen's graduating class. This represents what truly matters, investing in people society overlooks, believing in human potential for transformation and growth. The ceremony concluded with Theodore's traditional ritual of placing the wallet in its permanent display case near the kitchen entrance. The engraved plaque beneath "Read Dignity" is not about where you've been, it's about how you treat others along the way. Students and visitors would see this reminder daily as they entered the space that had become a beacon of hope for the entire region. 3 years after the confrontation outside, Giuseppe's national media featured Theodore's innovative model as a solution for homelessness and workforce development. The program had been replicated in 8 states, adapting to local needs while maintaining core principles, dignity skills, training, community support, and genuine second chances for all participants. During his appearance on a national morning show, Theodore was asked about the secret to his program's success. "We don't measure success by how many people graduate," he explained to the host. "We measure it by how many lives are transformed, including graduates, volunteers, and community members who discover the power of treating everyone with basic human dignity and respect." The final scene took place at 5 in the morning, Theodore's traditional start time for preparing the day's lessons. A new student arrived early, a young woman recently escaped from domestic violence, eager to learn knife skills that could provide her with independence and self-sufficiency. Theodore worked beside her with the same patience he had shown years ago when replacing contaminated shrimp to save lives. "Remember," he told her as she practiced her cuts, "precision in the kitchen translates to precision in life. Cut away what's harmful, keep what nourishes. Cook with love, serve with respect, treat every ingredient and every person as having value and potential for greatness." Marcus entered quietly to begin his own prep work, now serving as Assistant Director of Supply Coordination. There was no hierarchy in this space, just people committed to honest work, community service, and mutual support for each other's growth and healing. The camera pulled back to reveal Second Chance Kitchen in full operation, multiple classes running simultaneously. Former graduates teaching new students, community volunteers, working alongside formerly homeless individuals. This was Theodore's calling, found through losing everything else but discovering what really mattered in the process. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover your true purpose. Theodore's voice concluded over the final images. "For me, it was never about being recognized as a great chef. It was about using food to build community, create hope, and remind everyone they have inherent value that no circumstance can diminish." Have you ever felt invisible, judged by your appearance, or wondered if doing the right thing is worth the cost? Theodore's journey from respected chef to homeless hero proves that dignity lives in our choices, not our circumstances. His story shows us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to change lives, including our own. If you believe everyone deserves respect and second chances, that moral courage can triumph over pride and fear, then you're not alone. Join our community at Homeless Stories, where we share real tales of resilience, redemption, and hope. Hit that like button if Theodore's story touched your heart, and subscribe to discover more inspiring journeys that remind us humanity's greatest strength lies in lifting each other up one story at a time.